What if the families behind your phone, car, and home secretly control the future of an entire country? In South Korea, just a few Chaebols control 77% of the market, but employ less than 10% of workers. These powerful business empires defied their own government until the United States stepped in. This is the untold story of South Korea's Chaebols. After the Korean War, South Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world, but then something big happened. The government teamed up with a few powerful families and gave them money, land, and support to build factories, create jobs, and help the country grow. These families were called Chaebols, which means wealthy clans. At first, they built cars, ships, and electronics. The Samsung family made TVs and phones. Hyundai made cars and buildings. LG made radios, later refrigerators and phones. The more they made, the more they owned. These Chaebols didn't just run one company. They owned dozens, sometimes even hundreds of companies under their name. They were like family kingdoms, each one with a boss at the top, usually the son of the last boss. By the 1980s and 1990s, the Chaebols were so big that they controlled most of South Korea's economy. Some people were proud. The Chaebols made South Korea famous around the world. Others were worried. These families had too much power. Then came 1997. That year, a storm hit South Korea, but not the kind with wind and rain. It was an economic storm. The country's money, called won, lost half its value. Companies couldn't pay their debts. Every month, over 3,000 companies go bankrupt. Even Daewoo, one of the biggest Chaebols, completely collapsed. Why? Some said the Chaebols were growing too fast, buying businesses they didn't understand. They thought they were too big to fail. Banks gave them loans without thinking twice. Others blamed the foreign investors. When things got scary, investors from other countries took their money out quickly, and South Korea's economy cracked like glass. The government rushed to fix things. It forced the Chaebols to sell parts of their companies. Samsung had to give up making cars. LG sold its chip-making business. The plan was called the Big Deal. Only the strongest Chaebols survived. Out of the top 30 Chaebols, 16 went bankrupt. But the survivors like Samsung, Hyundai, SK, and LG grew smarter. They focused on fewer things. They became global. Samsung made sleek phones and fancy TVs. Hyundai makes luxury cars. SK built the world's fastest internet. The Chaebols had been shaken, but they didn't fall. As the Chaebols got richer, their leaders got bolder. Some felt untouchable. That's when the world saw how power could twist into arrogance. It started with a bag of nuts. On December 5, 2014, Heather Cho, a vice president at Korean Air and daughter of the company's CEO, was flying first class. A flight attendant handed her macadamia nuts in a bag, not on a plate. That made her so angry she yelled at the staff, hit the crew chief with her iPad, and forced the plane to return to the gate before takeoff. The whole flight was delayed for 20 minutes. People were shocked. News stations called it Nutgate. In Korea, it was called Tang Kong Hoang, which means nut return. Heather Cho later went to jail, but only for 5 months. Many said if she weren't from a Chaebol family, the punishment would have been worse. Then in 2017, another story broke. This time it was Kim Dong-seon, the youngest son of Hanwha Group's chairman. A video showed him in a fancy bar in Seoul. He jumped over the bar, punched the bartender, pulled his hair, and hit the manager with a whiskey bottle. Police arrested him, but again, many people didn't trust the outcome. Online commenters said things like money is law, and in Korea, the rich are never guilty. One person even wrote, "Let Alpha Go be the judge. I'm tired of human judges letting them go." To the public, it was clear. Chaebol power wasn't just about money. It bent the law too. So if Chaebol power could bend the law, what else could it bend? The answer came quickly. The entire economy. By 2024, just one group, Samsung, was responsible for 23% of South Korea's total economy. That's almost 1/4 of everything the country made, sold, or earned in a year. To compare, America's biggest company, Walmart, only makes about 2.5% of the US economy. Samsung isn't just about phones. It's also building ships, making life insurance, drilling oil, building cities, and even running Everland, South Korea's largest theme park, with roller coasters so fast they'd make your heart skip. And Samsung's not alone. Hyundai, SK Group, LG, Lotte, Hanwha, POSCO, and more are each giant machines made up of dozens of smaller companies, all run by one family at the top. Together, South Korea's top 10 Chaebols now control over 65% of the country's GDP. That means most of the jobs, money, and businesses belong to them. But when so much power sits in so few hands, there's danger. These families often pass control from parent to child, not based on skill, but by blood. Instead of running smarter businesses, many started relying on political connections and backroom deals. In December 1977, disaster struck. The economy that once grew like a rocket suddenly fell like a rock. The Korean won lost half its value. Companies couldn't pay their loans. Banks started to fail. Panic spread. One of the biggest chaebols, Kia, collapsed with $10.7 billion in debt and 60,000 jobs at risk. 11 chaebols went bankrupt and 10 more were closed. It was costing South Korea about $100 billion, which was 20% of the country's economy. The government didn't have enough money to fix it, so they turned to the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. The IMF gave South Korea a bailout, money to save the economy, but with rules. The rules were tough. More honesty in money reports, better leadership in big companies, and real punishment for corporate crime. The goal was to make sure chaebols couldn't grow too fast or cheat the system again. But even with these reforms, old habits returned. Between 2003 and now, Samsung, Hyundai, Lotte, SK, and Hanwha have all faced charges like bribery, fraud, and embezzlement. And somehow, the leaders walk free almost every time. It's what people now call the 3-5 rule. Get sentenced to 3 years but serve 0, because the sentence is suspended for 5. Even after the IMF's tough rules, another problem stayed hidden. Like a secret map only chaebol families could read. Their business rules were confusing and regular investors were often left out. This made people nervous. Foreign investors didn't trust the system. That's how the Korea discount was born. The Korea discount means South Korean companies are worth less than they should be. Samsung, for example, could be twice as valuable if it had better governance. But investors stay away because they fear unfair deals. While the US stock market trades at a price-to-book ratio of 4.8, Korea's is just 0.87. Even Japan is higher. Why? Because in chaebols, family always comes first, not the shareholders. Deals are made behind closed doors. One company, Korea Zinc, tried to stop a takeover by selling shares to friends and family at the last minute. It sparked a scandal and made things even worse. Chaebols don't just hurt investors, they crush smaller companies too. Small and medium-sized businesses called SMEs are shrinking. In some cities like Gwangju and Seong, factory use dropped to just 54% and 60%. In 2023, 315 small companies shut down. Even with good ideas, SMEs can't compete with the low prices and huge reach of chaebols. One manager said, "We can build great products, but nobody buys them. They just buy the cheap stuff from the big guys." Above all, chaebols pay 50% more than SMEs, so young people only want to work for them. But chaebols hire mostly from the top 3 Sky universities. This creates an education arms race. In 2022, families spent 11% more on private tutors. Poorer students are left behind. Even graduates from elite schools now struggle to find jobs. In 2019, 1 in 4 Koreans aged 15 to 29 was unemployed. And 6 out of 10 said they had little chance of improving their lives. But that's not all. Chaebols don't just rule the economy. They influence politics too. They fund campaigns, dodge inheritance taxes, and shape laws. In 2016, millions protested against Samsung President Park's bribery case. But years later, all 3 major players, Samsung's Lee, President Park, and ex-President Lee were pardoned. Today, chaebols control 77% of South Korea's market, but employ only a few percentage of its workers. They touch everything: factories, schools, newspapers, and while the government promises reforms, most of them are voluntary. The pyramid remains, with all the power stacked at the top and everyone else hoping it doesn't fall. South Korea's chaebols built a miracle, but at what cost? When loyalty to family beats loyalty to law, who really wins? Are chaebols a force for progress or a dangerous trap? Drop your thoughts below.